Let's get started then. Thank you everyone so much for joining this evening. We have our Parenting Resilience webinar all about the school holidays coming up. If you have any questions throughout, just drop them into the Q&A boxes and we'll answer them as we go through. Handing over to Bev.
Hi, I'm Bev. I'm the, this is a long one, the Collaboration, Education and Empowerment Coach with ADHD 360. And over to Phil.
Oh, wow. Yes, thanks, Bev. And I think, first of all, as I introduce myself, I'll just say that that's a long title, but Bev leads on our non-medical interventions and coaching and that kind of thing, does a really good job. My name's Phil Anderton. I'm the Managing Director of ADHD 360, and I'm going to hand you over to Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Mangle, and I'm the Clinical Director at ADHD 360. So I'm responsible for assessing patients as well as managing the clinicians. So yeah, that's me.
Perfect. So Bev, as a mother yourself, how about you tell us all about the school holidays?
Oh gosh, it seems such a long time ago now because mine are quite old. Although my daughter's 30 this year and she will not be happy that I've just said that. I think for me, I always worked during the holidays. So when my children were younger, I was undiagnosed ADHD, didn't have a clue that I had it. So when I was off, the rare times that I was off with them during the holidays, it was a case of cramming as much in as I possibly could. I would literally, it would be like a regimented process of, you know, you're up and at 'em at sort of 8 o'clock, we're out the door at 9 o'clock, we'll be doing this, that, and it became overwhelming. I think it was overwhelming, not just for them, but for me, obviously, because I was undiagnosed. And I think I did it because I felt guilty as a working mum. And I think a lot of us tend to be working mums now. We don't have the luxury of being at home. And I think I learned a little too late that I just needed to pace myself and allow us just to be. And that was something that I just couldn't do, just something that just didn't work for me.
Do you think it's interesting how you put that, Bev, because there's parallels to life through COVID as well, aren't there? You know, when we did a lot of webinars through the COVID times, and we kind of found two groups of kids. One group of kids that were really enjoying being at home, and because they didn't suit the structure of school and what have you, they were enjoying it and were learning more at home. And those kids that actually didn't want to be at home because they actually miss the structure of school and what it provides them. And I guess in terms of me thinking to get ready for this, and is the conversation around that whole Bob Brooks theory of scaffolding and structure around our kids in times of holiday. And there's what you just said resonated with me. There's a difference between it becoming a military operation, which nobody can actually sustain, but and then still having some scaffolding and structure, which actually still has some free time and some downtime. How did you adapt and in all your work with parents and kids that you've done in the latter years, which is extensive? Where's your thoughts on that scaffolding, structure and downtime thing then?
Well, I think obviously since my diagnosis and then my son's diagnosis subsequently, I thought I just learned really that I needed to adapt to him. I needed to adapt to his needs rather than what my expectations were. It doesn't have to be this military operation. It can just be relaxed. And I think for me, it was involving him in the decision process as to what we did, because I thought it would be really fun to go on Go Ape and, you know, go down a zip line. That might not be what he wants to do, because the holidays are also a time for him to recharge his batteries, ready to go back to school in a week or 2 weeks, whenever it was. And he's 19 now, but he's still, you know, needs to have that time to relax and recharge because he goes to college. So he does work quite intensely. So for me, we still have that structure, but it's a bit more relaxed. The structure is so important, but more on his terms than mine.
If I just ask Lisa a question, I'm going to come back to you, Bev, if I can. linking into that downtime and that kind of thing, we used to hear back in the early days, we hear it less now in good medical practice. We hear it in dodgy medical practice. The school holidays is time for a holiday from medicine and a break from medicine. All three of us here have got some very scientific, evidence-based views on that. And I wonder, Lisa, if you can nail that one out before we go any further, really.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I still hear this now, that parents think that because they've read it on the internet or they've heard it from other doctors that you need drug holidays. And it actually harks back to the days 20 years ago when I started in ADHD, where the scientists or whoever thought that you grew out of ADHD when you turned 16. You woke up on your 16th birthday and all of a sudden you didn't have ADHD. So the drug holidays were around seeing whether you'd still got ADHD or not. And obviously we now know that this is genetic and, you're not going to grow out of it. So I think for me, I always say to parents and to adults who've got ADHD, medicine's not just about education and work, it's about life. And so a lot of my patients actually enjoy the social life a lot better when they're actually medicated. But I mean, what I might do, depending on the situation and what's happening with the child, I might have slightly different medication at the weekends and in the school holidays. So they might have immediate release, for example, instead of extended release if they've got issues with their appetite or the weight or whatever. So I will have a bit of a jiggle round with the medicine, but I'm not a fan of drug holidays because, for me, it's about making the life easier, not just school or work. And social life is just as important.
Just as important, it is.
Yeah.
There's some great comments in here. I'm just going to pick up a few and then come back to you, Bev, if I can. Somebody asked, what kind of sports or activities would you recommend for children with ADHD? And I use the story that we used to work in Lancashire, and we got some funding to put sports activities on in the evening for kids with ADHD. And we trained some sports coaches on specific ADHD related activities. And it was hilarious that the first time they turned up, they said, well, let's get everybody to play rounders. And I sort of then started to discuss with these sports coaches the concept of someone who's impatient, not wanting to wait, slightly going to have some form of clumsiness, perhaps with swinging a bat at a single ball. So you ask them to queue for 10 minutes. By the time you get the bat, they're ready to swing it at a human being, not at a ball that they're not going to find. And say, right, should we just qualify where the rounders is a good idea? And that kind of woke everybody up in the sports coaching group to so let's have fast moving contact, literally on the go, some form of tag rugby or running up and down, and making sure that kids with ADHD are active. They don't want to wait. They're not going to like waiting. Queuing up it's one of the flipping questions in the diagnostic criteria is how do you perform in a queue? So why would we give them sports with a queue? Running, walking, cycling, all of those kind of things. And we've seen some great results where we've had parents learn how to cycle again themselves to take their kids out, or to start running with their kids. And even if it's just around the block, just started to do those things together. And I wonder, Bev, if it's something you could talk to about parents with their children doing exercise, not just saying to the child, right, get out of the house, go and have a run. Well, that's just not going to work, is it?
No. I mean, I got a hands up. I was second base at rounders. I was put in fielder and I couldn't throw the ball straight. So they put me on second base and I was so bored. I used to miss when they threw the ball at me. So I totally get the rounders thing. But when my son was younger, we tried every type of sport, everything you can imagine. We took him to trampoline club. We did karate. And the problem with trampoline club was that you had to wait your turn. So you had 5 minutes on the trampoline, the next child, then you were standing around. Then we took him to judo. or karate. I can't remember which one it was. You bought all the kit because you wanted him to be, in really intrinsically motivated. And he got bored of them standing there and coming and correcting his legs and his stance. So that went down the toilet. So there were lots of things we tried. But, sport, I totally agree with you, Phil. It has to be something that is active, that you can do. You can just jump straight into it. And I think nowadays, when my son was younger, we didn't have the places like Saw and the trampoline big venues that you have. For me, doing that with Mason, before COVID, I'd get on the trampoline and do it with him. It was great, and it helped my ADHD. He was over the moon I don't know if he was over the moon because I fell quite a bit, but us doing things together, it wasn't pretty, but us doing things together just was great fun. I love the cycling thing as well. We live by the beach, so being able to go up the beach and just go for walks. He likes walking, which is great. So we do a lot of walking together. But yeah, for me, if I've got a child at home, particularly during COVID, that was for us a really big thing because he got very antsy. He wanted to move, he wanted to get out. We would just do lots of, especially when he was doing his schoolwork, lots of breaks. So 20 minutes of work, go, get up, move around, go up to your room, go and have a snack in the kitchen, go and do some weights because he had some hand weights, and do something like that and actually what that does is, as we know, that stimulates the adrenaline, stimulates the dopamine and the noradrenaline, which helps the executive functions for focus and concentration. So it was a win-win situation for us.
You just segued straight into, and Lisa, I'm going to come to you about a circuiting question in a moment, but you just segued really well there into
it wasn't
the question.
Planned.
No, it's just the way it falls with questions and the topic matter, doesn't it? Subject matter. There's a question here about the child just wanting to chill all day and with bursts of energy, but needs to study for exams and going back to school. How do you motivate to relax? And for me, that's all about having the right reward structure and not a punishing penal structure in the household, isn't it? Where right, I need you to do an hour's work and prove to me that hour has been beneficial. When you've done that, go for a run, watch the telly, play on your Xbox, but it'll be for 45 minutes or whatever. Then I want you back and I want you outside for half an hour getting some fresh air. Then I want you to work to earn your next your next nice thing, as it were. We know we've got 3 hours of work to do. So how do we best structure? And to take your point earlier, you work that out as a structured timetable with your son, your daughter, and you work it through together. But I think sometimes our parenting suffers that we forget that we actually have to be the parent, and we have to say, right, that's your hour of study. This is a rare event, but I'm going to stop you studying now because now's the time for you to go and have some fun. Go and have your hour's fun or whatever it is. I'll give you a shout 10 minutes before it's due to end. And on the hour, we'll come back and I want you to either have something to eat or go and do. And that whole structure starts to build into a reward mechanism as opposed to getting shouted at, cross, angry, and what have you. And it doesn't have to make life easier if everything's built off a reward structure as opposed to off a telling off, doesn't it? And how did that go for you? And how do you coach parents now on that in the coaching that you do in that kind of reward positive?
Yeah, it's finding the motivator. Everybody has a motivator. Doesn't matter what it is. For a lot of children nowadays, it's they want to go online gaming or they want to go and meet with friends. So you can use those motivators to actually get them to do what they need to do. I've been coaching someone who is doing he's doing A-levels at the moment, and that's something that is a struggle. It's trying to stay focused in that environment for long periods of time. It's not like primary school or secondary school. These are long sessions of learning. So when he gets home and he has to do extra work or his assignments, it's like, well, find your motivator. But actually what we have discussed is planning to procrastinate. So we can plan. I know it sounds it sounds utterly stupid, doesn't it? But plan to procrastinate. So if you know that you've got something to do, so, having ADHD myself, if I know I'm going to be writing a blog or something about ADHD or whatever topic it might be, I will open up a blank sheet of paper and I will put 6 bullet points on that blank piece of paper and a heading of what that's going to be. Now, those 6 bullet points are going to be my key indicators to start when I come back from my procrastination. So I'm not starting with a blank page and thinking, oh, well, what the heck's this all about? I'm going to go off and watch a bit more of my, Bridgerton, my second series of Bridgerton. So I will actually just get on with the work. So planning to procrastinate can actually help us stay on task when it is time to get moving.
And putting that into place in the activities we're building in our child's life for the Easter break. Is really important. Lisa, there's a question about Circadin here, and a GP's advice that it will stop the individual ever making their own natural melatonin. Now, you and I and our clinical colleagues have spent a lot of time with Flynn Pharma, the people that bring Circadin to market, and the producers. We've learned a lot about it over the years. What's your response to that?
So sometimes I do find that if you use melatonin all the time, then people can appear for it not to be as effective. So what I tend to recommend, if that happens, because it doesn't happen in everyone, but if it does happen, then my recommendation is to use it on a school night or a work night and have a break on a Friday and a Saturday, so that you're not sort of building up that tolerance. So that's one sort of strategy that you could use. The other question I wanted to answer, Phil, was Holly's around managing meltdowns and would medication help with this? So I just want to show you a bit of a diagram. So it's a technical diagram called the lose it line. Just get some light on the matter. So this is your child, Holly. So your child probably looks like they're going from 0 to 100 like that, but they're actually not. This line here is your child lose it line, whatever that looks like. And they're hovering just below. They look normal for all intents and purposes, but they're actually just below this lose it line. And one little thing happens and you get a blip and you've crossed this line. Now, some children and adults quickly come below that line when they've calmed down. And so the whole house is reeling from this massive meltdown and the child's moved on. Now, treatment for ADHD will bring that child straight down here. So they're not close to the lose it line. You have the same blip and we're not going to lose it because we're not here. Something big would have to happen for that child to peak. So this is what happens when you treat ADHD in a child who's doing exactly what you're describing, Holly. Now, obviously, over time, I want them to continue to come down to this baseline, and they will get there with good management. But this is essentially what will happen in a child who's having or an adult who's having those lose it events on a regular basis. So really good question.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff in here that we could pick out in terms of, and I think it's, again, I'm going to relate back to Bob Brooks, a great American psychologist in the ADHD world, and he talks about the islands of competence, and every one of us, but especially our children with ADHD, they have something that they want to do, that passion, and he talked about, in fact, it was another guy as well, talked about a lad at school who was misbehaving all the time, and the teacher took him to one side and said, right, look, I'm struggling to cope with you behaving like this on a constant basis. What is it would make you happy at school? That's a risky question for any kid, isn't it? What's going to... And this child answered that he just wanted to look after the school rabbit. That's what he wanted. And I know, God love him. So the teacher arranged that if he was good for a couple of days on the bounce, he could then go and look after the rabbit at break time or something. And that progressed into this kid starting to run the school zoo and becoming the school animal keeper. But it completely changed that child's behavioural pattern, because what that teacher did was find out what motivated that child. And that's so important. And you can't force that on a child. What you can do is give examples like judo, karate, this, that, and the other. And you can end up costing a fortune and getting nowhere. But you've still got to find that Islander competence, what they really want to do. So great examples in here. My son enjoys going to the woods with the dogs, exploring and getting muddy. Well, that's,
perfect.
It's control free, isn't it? Go somewhere where you can. What is it when you search for those things with an app on your phone and you get you find the little things with messages in and what have you? I can't remember what it's called now.
Oh, geocaching.
Geocaching.
Love that. Fantastic.
And it's so good for an ADHD youngster because you can do it at so many levels, and you chuck them in a wood and there's a geocache to go and find, and they're plotting it and working it out, and it can work. It can assist the ADHD child, the child with ADHD, to concentrate, focus, but running around the wood and finding things and getting reward and getting excited about getting the next one. I want to go and find the next one. In fact, I want to go back to the first one because I don't think I found it quick enough. And all of that really plays into it. Treasure trails, as Jill said here, and someone said it's hard to entertain a 5-year-old with behavioural issues. It absolutely is. No one's going to try and make this sound easy, but getting outside, getting some exercise, getting on the go, try and keep up with them if you can. Things like walking in the woods, walking on the beach, we can all find those places there to go to, and that becomes the reward, doesn't it, Bev? It becomes, if you are great for the next hour, we will be going to the woods. Now, what 1, 2, 3 Magic teaches us is, if you promise that, you've got to bloody deliver.
You've got to deliver. Absolutely.
And the moment you break that contract, the child's got you over a barrel. And
the consistency is so important, isn't it?
It is. What's that mnemonic you use about school holidays and things? You wrote it on that paper.
I did. I call it Casper's. So if anyone remembers Casper the Friendly Ghost, it's nothing to do with that. But the first thing is about maintaining consistency and structure. So C and S is consistency and structure, and it's trying to keep to a similar schedule. So if, for instance, the school day that your children get up at 7, get them up at 7 or as close to it as you possibly can. Because when they go back to school in a week or 2 weeks, it's going to be a struggle to get them back into that routine again. So try and keep them as structured and consistent as you possibly can. The next one is P, and it's a double P, so it should be Casper, but it's planning and prioritizing activities together. And Jo put a comment in the chat, and she was saying about her son's low boredom threshold. What are we doing next week? So just before I carry on with that, one thing that I wanted to mention was anxiety can cause that. And I don't know if you agree with that, Lisa. I think one of our ADHD nurses explained it to me that if you've got a child that is constantly saying, what's next, it's the anxiety coming up, isn't it?
Yeah, anxiety plays a huge part in ADHD. And I think because as a team, we cover the lifespan. So our youngest patient is 4 and our eldest patient, I think, is 77 now.
Wow.
So we can actually learn from our adult patients how our young patients feel. So anxiety, about 75% of my adult patients come with a history of anxiety, low mood, or both. And yet it's something that we often miss in children. And, they often kick off because they're anxious. So a lot of aggressive behaviour is because actually we're anxious. And looking at physical symptoms in children that you might get when you're anxious is key. So what's the heart rate doing? Have they got diarrhea or constipation? What physically is going on that could give you a little bit of a tip that this child's anxious, dry mouth, not wanting to go to school, that kind of thing. So that's a really good point.
And you also, following on from that, going back to the Caspers, is the planning and the prioritizing is actually involving him in the decision making. And that's something that we do when we do our group family coaching sessions. We talk about, let's work together as a family. We live in a democracy, so let's have a democratic family home environment. It's going to be less combative. You're going to have less of that oppositional behaviour because they're actually involved in it. And I hate the word rules. Maybe it's because I've got ADHD, I don't know. But I prefer to say like family expectations. So sit down as a family and sort of say, right, this is what we expect of you. And what do you expect of us? It shouldn't just be a one-sided thing. It should be something that the parent carers are involved in as well. So then you're modeling to your child how you expect them to behave and what you so it might be, I remember working with a family quite a while back, and the mum, her phone was her lifeline. She was on her mobile phone all the time. So they'd get home from school and she was on the phone, and he actually said in our group session, I feel like you're not paying any attention to me, and I want to have your time. So they put down as one of the expectations that she wouldn't go on her phone until he'd gone to bed. And the consequence, if she did go on her phone, was, I can't remember what it was, but there was something, he said what it was. But using that in a family environment, it does help so much. But the planning and prioritizing. So I think we've got a handout or download from the website, haven't we, Phil, that everyone can download, and it's just like a sheet that you can work together as a family of activities you want to do during the holidays. Everybody puts their opinions in, and then everybody in the family decides, well, yeah, they put a tick next to that one, I wouldn't mind doing that, we'll prioritize that one, but I'm not so keen on doing those sort of things. Another thing is to exercise, and Phil, you've touched on it already. You need to keep it up. I mean, personally, I don't know about you and about everybody else who's watching, I personally think that 1 or 2 lessons of PE a week isn't enough.
Not enough.
No.
It should be every day. And I'm thinking in the Japanese or Chinese schools, they do exercise every morning as part of assembly, don't they?
Yeah.
It should be part and parcel, shouldn't it?
Have you ever met in your travels a guy called Matt Morgan?
No.
Matt Morgan, he's the most amazing guy, and he amplifies that very thing. So I first met Matt at a CHAD conference in America on ADHD, and he was, at that time, I'm a big lad, and he made me look like a shrimp. He really did. He's huge, is Matt.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he is an absolutely huge. But he's one of these American wrestlers, or he was. He's retired now, and he really great bloke, huge presence, and he stands on stage and talks about his ADHD as an adult. And the thing that made the difference for him in school was one of his teachers, and he names her when he's on a platform talking. She recognised that when his attention had gone, she'd chuck him a basketball and say, go outside for 20 minutes, shoot hoops for 20 minutes, and then come right back in.
Wow.
Matt learned that was his 20 minutes. He'd go out, he would shoot hoops for 20 minutes, he'd come back in, and then he'd get the next 40 minutes out of the class. And there was a conflict at one stage between a new head teacher and the teacher that was giving him the basketball breaks. And the head teacher said, but he's missing 20 minutes of class. And the teacher who had clocked where Matt was with this said, yeah, but he's getting the next 40 minutes. And if we didn't miss that 20, we'd lose the whole hour, because that how important that exercise is, and the frequency of that was there for Matt. But that kind of leads into another question. And there's a statement from Charlotte. I find it hard and impossible to get my 18-year-old with ADHD to exercise or go outside. She likes staying in a room most of the time. What do you do with adult kids? I think there's one thing we've got to recognise here, Charlotte. That's a classic 18-year-old. That's not an 18-year-old with ADHD. And sometimes I think we can bracket everything in around that ADHD label, and sometimes we may be being hard on ourselves, never mind on our. I've had 3 18-year-old kids now in my life. One of mine and 2 of my new wives. She came as a package deal, and I guarantee you, at 17, 18, all of them have stayed in their room for most of the day and grunted, and that's just about what they kind of go in at 16
when they want food.
Yeah, 16 and come out at 19 with an empty plate. And that seems to be very typical behaviour. Yeah. And I think we've got to be really careful what we try and break as a behavioural pattern and determine as being ADHD behaviours, because some of that is just normality. And
also
we have to
remember when you were 18, I mean, I was exactly the same. I lived in my bedroom. So you've got to think back to what we did when we were that age, and I didn't want to spend any time with my parents. Thank you very much. I'd rather just spend it with my friends. Going back to that exercise question, ages ago there was a news article about a school where they did they walked, ran, or were pushed in a wheelchair a mile once a day. And when the bell went off, the school, that was a primary school, when the bell went off, the whole school left the building and travelled a mile. And and there were kids in wheelchairs, and they got calipers, and it probably took about half an hour, but there was no obese child in that school. And the mental health and well-being of those kids was incredible. And I'll never forget it. And I remember saying to my kids at the time, I think it came out just before a summer holiday, and I said, right, we're doing that. If a teacher can do it, we're going to do it. And we did it for the summer, and I'd got like a school bell, and we just rang it, and whatever time it was, we went and we did a mile, and it was brilliant. And we all did it, and sometimes it would peeing it down, and other times it wouldn't, but it made a huge difference in how we functioned as a family. Can I also address that girl question as well? So there was a question about girls and how they present, and so you're absolutely right about the girls and how they can present. But boys can also present that way as well if they're a certain personality type. So we can't forget that. But a while ago, there was an article in The Guardian about female ADHD. I think it was about November last year. And the journalist had been diagnosed with ADHD. And check it out, because it's a brilliant article. And then it was all over TikTok. It just exploded, and there was female ADHD everywhere. And then about 3 or 4 months after that, and our waiting list at that time for private patients was about 3 or 4 months. For the whole of March, I've not seen one male patient. They've all been female. And it was really weird, because the last week, one of my last patients had a unisex name, and I'm like, please be a girl, please be a girl. And it was. And that has never happened in my 20 years career of working in ADHD. So one, I was really proud that happened. And two, the tide has definitely turned in female ADHD, because we know, and I know, that it's 50-50. Male and female ADHD, it's genetic, so but those girls who, generally girls, but sometimes boys, and I've seen a guy today who presents exactly like that, they're masking school. So you speak to the school and they'll say, no, we don't have a problem here, and then the kid comes home and explodes, because that is their comfort zone. And they love you and you love them. So I can explode because you're going to forgive me. But I'm not going to do that in school, in front of the head teacher or the teacher or my peers. But that doesn't mean they're not struggling. So teachers need to think differently. And so if they've got a girl or a guy who is constantly going to the toilet, constantly sharpening pencils, constantly offering to do jobs, constantly wanting to be the milk monitor or the register monitor or whatever, can I hand those books out? That's hyperactivity, and it doesn't come across as hyperactivity because the kid's wanting to please. So teachers have got to think differently, because these generally girls are struggling, and then it turns to anxiety, depression, eating disorder, self-harm, all those internalizing behaviours that we know are very common in our female patients. So you're right, girls do behave differently in a general sense, but I do think the tide's turning. So if you've got a girl who school said there's not a problem, and there's a problem, don't give up. Go and find that article in The Guardian and take it to your GP and get your child referred, because it's a game changer, actually, a diagnosis and treatment, as Bev will probably allude to, and it's life-changing getting it right.
There's a number of comments here which I think we can help distill out a little bit. On the one hand, we've got a group of parents who seem to be respecting getting that planning and prioritizing. And on the other hand, we've got a group that perhaps don't get it. For me, some of the labeling that we use can actually be dysfunctional at times. I genuinely believe that what we've got going on in here, whether it's an autistic trait or an ADHD trait, dyslexia, dyspraxia, it doesn't matter. What's going on in here needs a bit of help. And whatever label we put to it, whatever it is, what we need to work out is what needs help, and then help, and not be constructed around the label. Now, you know, many a teenage child in particular, but because they can express themselves more, but young children as well. If there is a plan and then that plan's not being executed to plan, will get really anxious about it. And that's in some people's mind, that's an autistic trait. I don't care. It's in here that when there's a plan, they need a plan. They want to follow the plan, must have a plan, got to follow the plan. Why aren't we following the plan? And if they're not able to express that disconnect in their own self, their stress and anxiety by that, they will play up. They will become really difficult to manage. And it's our job to see that anxiety and to work out if our child, if they are a child that needs a plan and needs to follow a plan, then that's what we should do. And that responsibility sits with the grown-up in that relationship. And a 5-minute adjustment or being late out the door will put that person under incredible pressure and actually push things right to that lose it line straight away. Whereas if we're with a child that really doesn't need a plan, still got stuff going on in here, I don't care what label we put to it, but doesn't need a plan, we don't have to be that rigid. And that's about finding out what we know about our children and being able to actually deal with it. And you may have within the family, you may have one child this is your ultimate nightmare, isn't it? One child that wants a plan and another child that doesn't want a plan, and you've got to work out the tolerance between, well, this is the part of the day when we're going to be planning it, and this is the part of the day when we're not going to be planning it. And if that goes well, this will go well. You tolerate this, you tolerate that. There's nothing to say we have to do everything together, so we can have. And it's about over the 20 years or so I've been playing with this ADHD thing in my life professionally. I just think most of the adjustment is with the person that doesn't have the ADHD. Most of the adjustment is with the parent or the carer or the teacher, dare we say it. And we need to be very, very aware of the impact of ourself into that relationship, which can go catastrophically right and catastrophically wrong if we don't get it right. And I'm going to come back to you, Bev, in terms of, you know, your work as coach, as parent coach, and as mentor to families and things. I'm pretty certain that a lot of that is not actually about the ADHD child or the autistic child. It's actually about mum or dad or guardian or grandparents or what have you. How do you find that dynamic in terms of Easter holidays, if we bring it back to why we're here?
Yeah, I think the thing is, there's an awful lot of responsibility on us as carers when we have children who are different, you know, whatever their condition might be. And I always go back to, I don't know if you've heard of it, the Emily Pearl Kingsley. It wasn't a poem, it was a paper she wrote, and it was called Welcome to Holland. And it was all about her expectations. She was having a child, and her child was born with a disability. She had Down syndrome, but her expectations were that she was going to have this baby, and she likened it to a trip to Italy. She was going to be going to Italy, but instead of going to Italy, she landed at Holland. And she didn't want to be at Holland, she wanted to be at Italy. And I think there's, you know, when we have children, and I think it's a huge part of our resilience, I think that parents of children with SEN are hugely resilient. They don't think they are. They really don't. They have to fight for support for their child, to get a diagnosis if they think it's there and the school doesn't think it's there, and that sort of thing. But it all comes down to, as well, is our ability to emotionally regulate ourselves. You know, we need to be able to regulate ourselves, because if we've got a child who is emotionally dysregulated, and I call it climbing crisis mountain, and I know there are some people on here who I've worked with before, and that they'll find this very familiar. But, you know, I sort of go back to a story when my daughter was younger. She would come into the room and she would say to me, "Mum, where's my school trousers?" And she'd be quite aggressive with it. It wouldn't be just, you know, a nice ask. So immediately I would start climbing that mountain with her of, you don't talk to me like that. Your trousers are in your room. And then she would climb a little bit higher because she wanted to be louder and heard more than me. And, you know, inevitably I would start climbing with her. Before you know it, we had this big explosion. We climbed the top of the mountain. It became a volcano. There was this big outburst and everybody was emotionally dysregulated in the house. Whereas me as an adult, irrespective of the fact that I've got ADHD, I didn't know at the time, but I should have been able to stay on that lower level. I should have been able to stay on that line and bring her back down without us both climbing up. And I think that's one of the difficulties you have, is when you do have dysregulation in the family, in the household, you tend to climb that mountain, whether you wanted to or not. And you know, inevitably you come down the other side of the mountain and you get, I call it going into the pit of sadness, because when you're emotionally dysregulated, your brain goes into that fight, flight and freeze mode, doesn't it? All the oxygen goes, it goes down to the fist to fight, the feet to fly, or you freeze, body just freezes. So we need to, and that's what we do with the coaching, is to get those strategies back in place to help bring the oxygen back up here, get that sleepy secretary working, and help them to be more regulated and more reasonable. Because I know that when I'm emotionally dysregulated, I'm not reasonable at all. How do we expect children to be like that?
There's a number of comments here, and if I pick a couple of them out, Lisa, I'll come to you in a second if I can. Where going back to your part, Lisa, about, I'm pointing because that's on my screen where you are. You're over in that top corner, Bev. You're down there.
Oh, that's as it should be. Actually,
figuratively only. When you talked about kids coming home from school and exploding in their safe space, there's a number of parents called that out and sort of said, yeah, that happens. School don't believe what my child is like at home, and all those kind of comments. And there's a number of parents responding here, and I'm going to call it out. You should be really bloody proud that they do feel safe enough to be like that at home.
Yeah.
And that's a marker for you as a parent to actually think, right, we're getting something right. How can we now build off that? Yeah. And how can we avoid, and Bev's coaching, you know, and other people, you know, it's like, it's not just a recommendation for what we do, but the coaching around these things is hugely important. And we're big advocates of 1, 2, 3 Magic as a program and as a book and what have you. And I would just stress to everybody that seek the positives in what you are doing as a parent, because they're there. And if your child is being absolutely hideous when they get home from school, you should be really proud that they're coming home from school and doing it in front of you. It's tough, it's hard. Yeah. There's other parents saying in here, I am knackered by the end of the day of entertaining my 5-year-old child. Absolutely, you will be. But that's not all just about ADHD. Being a parent of a 5-year-old child is knackering per se. It's in the job description. You're not meant to get a lot of sleep with a 5-year-old. But try and find what it is that child can do for an hour that allows you some downtime, and make that push that into the reward system. And there seems to be a pathological dislike of gaming, Xbox, whatever the other ones are, far too old to know. But we seem to have a pathological dislike of them. Don't have, but just measure it and control it. Do you know when books were first introduced in schools and into kids' lives, there was a pathological dislike of children reading because it could hurt them and damage them. It's cyclical with everything that comes along that's new. Your child of the future will become an adult of the future, where gaming skills, computer skills, the ability to manipulate a joystick and manipulate a keyboard will be fundamental occupational skills. The child that has never played on an Xbox or a machine like that will struggle in terms of modern technology and modern environments. You just got to make sure it's not the dominant thing, and don't be frightened about them playing for an hour, as long as the games are appropriate and age related and all of those kind of things, and the internet controls are there and blah, blah, blah. But that could be your downtime. And I think as a parent, you deserve that. And you should build that into the reward process and the reward mechanism. And if there's someone saying rewards don't work for us, change the reward, find the reward that will work, because as Bev said earlier, there will be one, and you've got to keep trying. Don't give up. Resilience and parent resilience is huge here. And there's someone saying our rewards and our motivators constantly change. Well, that's fantastic, because your child's growing up. And the child that wanted to play the descant recorder at the age of 5 ain't going to want to do it in front of the schoolmates at the age of 16. You've got to move with the times. You've got to be able to move. And it comes back to being that parent again, doesn't it? And being appropriate. Lisa, if I switch back to you for a second, in terms of clinic and children in clinic and all those experiences we've had, what do you think is the biggest clinical learning as we approach a holiday? For some, I presume we're in a holiday now for the Easter period. What's clinically the biggest thing? We've talked about medicine holidays and put them to one side and what have you. What's the biggest thing for you with medicine and treatment over the break?
I guess for me, we as a team, we're quite creative with our prescribing. So say, for example, you've got a child who takes a medicine that lasts 10 or 12 hours for school, but actually, because they don't get much sleep on a holiday, they have a lie-in, then actually having a medicine that lasts 10 or 12 hours is not going to be helpful, because it's going to be still in the system at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're really not going to sleep. So as a clinician, it's my job to manage that and switch them to a shorter acting medicine or something that they can take a couple of times a day for 4 hours, and really make sure that that child has the opportunity to have that lie-in and recharge the batteries, especially if it's an introvert. So I've got a couple of things I wanted to say. One is Nicola Smith. You're not a failure. So your son's been diagnosed at 10. There are many adults who were missed as children. So you might feel like a failure, but you're absolutely not. And the other thing is to remove all those dangerous objects. So I recommend you get a safe. They're not that expensive, but you get all those dangerous items in it. Get your knives in, your steak knives, your tablets, all those things that could be dangerous to your son. Get them locked away, properly locked away, because he's only been diagnosed for 6 weeks. His treatment won't be optimal. And what that means is he's impulsive. So there is a chance he can do something and not come back from it. So you really need to ensure that all those dangerous things are removed. Melatonin is a good idea, because if he's not sleeping, then his ADHD treatment might not be on point if he's on treatment at the moment.
There's a comment here about a child waking up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. That sounds like an unruly puppy to me. I couldn't think of anything worse. I struggle to acknowledge there is a 4 o'clock in the morning these days. But those things that we talked about earlier, structure, reward, prioritizing, planning, involving exercise. Yes, I'm an advocate for a child having downtime. I really am. They need that downtime as much as anybody else. And if their downtime is kicking a football in the garden, it is. If it's playing on an Xbox, so be it. But we should also ensure that there is a healthy lifestyle, that there is outdoor activity, there is fresh air. And do you know what? It's going to rain at Easter. It always rains at bloody Easter. But it shouldn't stop us doing the things that we need to do. There's no such thing as bad weather, they say. It's just inappropriate clothing. Put your coat on, get out there with the kids. Get wet, get filthy wet, take them out and get them absolutely filthy in the woods. It does not matter. It just means you've got dirty clothes. Dirty clothes are better than a child that's got pent up energy and isn't knackered when they go to bed. And, we haven't mentioned here, and there's a lot of talk about sleep. The whole sleep hygiene thing, and Bev, you and I have just worked up some paraphernalia, some leaflets and what have you, about sleep hygiene, exercise and diet. And we're approaching Easter. We're talking about children and the holidays at the approach to Easter. You are going to fill your child with caffeine in chocolate. It's going to happen. You're going to do it to yourself. Just make sure you don't do it at 8 o'clock at night. Kids deserve an Easter egg. And my mum used to give me money instead of an Easter egg. And I look back now and think, flipping heck, what was that all about? I'd rather have chocolate, and I certainly would now. But just don't do it at 8 and 9 o'clock at night. Have a cut off for caffeine, have a good sleep hygiene. A walk around the block of an early evening doesn't do any harm either. A bath, those kind of, and we miss that sleep hygiene lesson sometimes, don't we? And never is that more important than when they're not at school, which is tiring. It is exhausting for our children. And you know, there's still talking here about meltdowns, and I think it's an awful word, meltdown, if I'm honest. I think there's something that's caused that, and we've got to find the cause, not treat the symptoms of it. And I know many a parent I speak to in this game now sort of say, when does your child have the meltdown? Well, it's normally when we're in Tesco's. Well, do you know what? Tesco's is really boring. And why are you insisting that our child goes to Tesco? Find another way of getting through that somehow. Because going to Super or going to Marks and Spencer's watching mummy buy a new bra is not entertaining for any child. And if we're expecting them to pay attention and be a good kid and manage their emotions and regulate their behaviour when there's something going on that they're not bought into, we are presenting them with a challenge that might be a challenge too far. It's exciting for me, this session, because Bev's got her ADHD clock on the wall behind her. And I can see, I've been watching it throughout the evening, Bev. You very cleverly set it to an hour, and we've got 3 or 4 minutes left. I wonder if we could perhaps, between the three of us, this is totally unplanned, as most of this is.
You're not going to ask us to sing, are you?
No. And I'll get my saxophone out and we'll play that. No, I can play 9 notes now. I just wonder if we couldn't all just pick out a statement, a question, or a comment, and respond to one each. And as I'm lining that up, Lisa, if you wouldn't mind going first, and pick one out as we start to close out, if you don't mind.
So there was a comment about meltdowns in school as well, not just out of school. So just to pick up on something that Phil said, there's always a reason for a behaviour. So you have to look at the antecedent, what happened before that behaviour. And it could just be something as simple as, I've missed the instruction in the lesson. The teacher said, now get on with your work, and I have no clue what I'm doing. So I'm just going to throw a chair to get kicked out of the lesson, rather than say, could you just repeat that because I was ADHD daydreaming or looking out the window. So it's about trying to get to that antecedent, what happened before. And it's not easy, because it could be something so small, but it's worth trying to find that out, because then you're going to crack the behaviour. And the teacher, all they have to do then is, give the instructions and then go to that child and give them again. So there's solutions for finding out what's caused that behaviour in school. And it's the same at home as well.
What about you, Bev? What have you picked out of this to respond to, do you think?
So just quickly following on from what Lisa said, because I've got a comment about everything, you know me, is keeping a diary. So when you've got a child with SEN, whether they're diagnosed or they're going on the pathway, is to diarise everything at the end of the day, or when you see something happen, because you will see you'll see a pattern emerging, and it'll really help your clinician to sort of get a grip of what's going on. But one of the things I was going to pick up on was a little bit of what you said, Phil, but someone has said about shopping. So I was similar to this lady here, that I didn't have anybody that I could drop Mason off with. My husband was at work, he was little, and he did not like Tesco's. He hated it. So he had to come shopping with me. There wasn't a choice. He had to come. But what I did was I used to go through with him. And you said about this earlier on in the session, was I said, right, I need to go to Boots. I need to go to the vegetable shop. I need to go to Tesco to get this, this, and this. I would have to plan it very, very strictly. But I couldn't divert off that. So if, for instance, I wanted to go into the newsagents and go and get a paper, no, that wasn't on the list. He would have the list. He would tick it off as we were going through it. And then when we got home, I could breathe a sigh of relief, because going out, if I didn't do that, was a nightmare. It was, total emotional dysregulation. I could feel my anxiety rise. I'm climbing that mountain. I'm at the top of the mountain before I've got to the end of the road, because he didn't know what we were doing. So that it comes back to that planning and prioritising. And just the last thing I wanted to mention was about the self-care. That was my last thing on my Caspers, and that is that as parents of children with SEN, parents and carers, we don't practice self-care. I very rarely put hand cream on. The only time I put hand cream, I think I did it just before this webinar, because I knew there was a little pot. Then I thought, oh, I'm just going to sit and put it. But I don't do things like that. Is have a little box of things, whether it's a face mask, a foot thingy that you know, those foot socks with all the cream on, some hand cream. Have all that in a little box by your bed or by the sofa, and just give yourself a little treat at the end of the day. You know, it'll help boost your spirits, if nothing else. That's
brilliant.
Me.
Absolutely brilliant. And we have a visual signal here that we're coming to the end of the planned time. And Kristen, who's our marketing lead, has popped back on the screen for us. And I think we should all say thank you to Kristen for pulling this together and making it happen in the way that you have. Awesome work, and getting our resources, Casper, and the planning and prioritising sheet are up on the web to be downloaded. This is going to sound like a plug. It's not a plug, but somebody's mentioned that their school don't see the ADHD in their child. Well, that's no blooming surprise to me. That happens an awful lot, and we have a lot of discussions, I'll call them, with schools that don't see the ADHD in the child, and I'm not particularly exercised to believe them, because they haven't done 11 years of psychiatry training like our clinical team have each done to become the experts that they are. So school can deal with the 3 R's, and we'll deal with medicine and ADHD treatment. And your GP won't refer, and that's possibly for many different reasons. But just remember, and this is going to sound really crass, but I'm going to say it for the sake of the person that's reached out. Private medicine does not have to break your bank. And if you go about it right, and you find the right provider, it doesn't have to be us at all. It can be less than the cost of a Starbucks a day, and you can save up and you can pay in installments and all those kind of things. It is not about paying money to someone that runs a big expensive Ferrari to get your child well and sorted. And I would encourage any of you, even those who are on the breadline, who've got no cash, got no money, you can find a way, and we can work with you to find a way for you to get the treatment that your child needs. And Lisa and I, we had this discussion right at the very start of ADHD 360, and I'm passionate about it. And I'm almost sorry I'm finishing with this. I need to finish with something else. But we will find a way to help you if you are prepared to help yourselves. And we will find a way through the financial mess to make sure that people get the help they need. We're closing out now. Kristen, can I just confirm with you that Casper and the prioritise and planning are up on the website? I think you put a link up.
Yeah, I've added a little link into the comment section for everybody. It's the link to Casper and the link to the holiday activity choices. I'm also just going to add in a little link for feedback, so that if anyone wants to give some feedback on today's webinar, we'd absolutely love it. So the link's in there for you as well.
And wherever mind, if you know, there's been 70 odd people on this webinar, we're of a mind to do these regularly. We brought this one into play because of Easter coming. We're thinking monthly, and you know, if there was a subject that was on your mind that you wanted these two experts and this hanger on here to discuss for an hour on a Wednesday evening, then just give us a shout and we'll build it into a plan. This whole event is just about helping people as we go into Easter and into holidays. But I think looking at the success of this in terms of the attendance and the comments, I'm encouraged to you guys to do this again. And Bev's clock has got no red on it. That's a great indicator. Kristen's popping up in front of me. If I take the thank you lead, Lisa, you're a hugely busy clinician, and I know that you've compromised some of your work in your home life to be here tonight, but this is what we're about, isn't it? And I'm really definitely grateful yet again to do a webinar with you. We do them regularly for other people. Now we're doing them for ourselves. It's magic. Brilliant. Bev, you're just a legend. And for those of you that don't know Bev, look her up, have a look, see what she does and how she does it. I'm so proud to have you on the team. It's incredible. And just the advice you've given tonight, without any planning, it's just it's a measure of the character and what you bring to the table. Kristen, the marketing team, brilliant as always. We put this together in very short space of time. Really, really grateful for your time and your effort. And it's noticeable that you've done your hair from when we had a meeting this afternoon as well.
It's so mean.
So I'd just like to thank everybody for attending, because if it was just the four of us, would it be really dull?
Thanks.
Well, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. It's late in the day. Give me some. I'm off with COVID, for crying out loud. Cut me some slack. Thank you, everybody, for attending, because honestly, you inspire us to do the work that we do on a constant basis. So can we close ourselves down and do the police squad thing now and try not to move as the credits roll?